Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm finally back, at least for the moment. For those that have been following me for a while, y'all know I have been occupied with studying for my certification. Anyway, I just wanted to let y'all know that I passed by the skin of my teeth. And as a gift, I decided to purchase the new Purple Harmony pillow. It's a pretty pricey pillow. And I probably wouldn't have gotten it if I hadn't had the Amazon gift card. I usually don't splurge on anything, but in this case, I thought I deserved it since I put in a lot of time and effort. I can finally sleep like a king. Nah, I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, let me know if y'all want to hear about the pillow, or if you're thinking about buying one. Like I said, it's quite expensive, and I wouldn't have gotten it had I not had the gift card I received from last Christmas. To me, it was definitely an investment. I thought about it for days before I finally bought it. I compared it with other ones, but decided on this one instead. So, without further ado, let's get on with the story. As always, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. You can also support me by purchasing some merchandise. The link is in the description. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the story. The Wish, Chapter 1. My mom couldn't drive, so she had my uncle drive us to visit my dad. It has been a while since we visited him. Mom said we can't visit him as often because the buses don't go out that far. I miss him a lot. Dad and I used to do everything together. We were like two peas in the pod. Even when Mom took my siblings to the store, I'd stay home with Dad and watch TV all day. He loved action movies. I never knew the names of them, but remembered watching lots of movies with soldiers, cowboys, and wrestling. I liked wrestling. My two favorite wrestlers were Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. Although there were good memories of him, there were also bad ones. Dad acted really strange when he came home from parties and gatherings, and was quite scary too. Besides that, he was great to us. Mom said Dad had a bad drinking problem, and it made him sick, so he had to go away. Mom and I brought him a care package. The whole family pitched in. The box was filled with an orange, boiled chicken, a can of soda, and some money we made through a lot of hard work. Though I'm not sure it can be used to buy candy or toys. I stared out the passenger window as the car turned from the main road into a smaller one. We passed through a gate where the road divided several huge green grassy fields on both sides of it. A few trees stood amongst the rows of various sized shape and color stone markers lined up next to one another. Many of them were decorated with flowers. I smiled as my eyes caught sight of a few teddy bears and balloons. When we got to Dad's house, we took everything out of the box. Mom started to cry as she offered him food and burned the money. I stood beside her as she did so. Dear husband, it's been a long time since we visited you. Today we brought you some food and money. It's been really hard without you. I miss you so much. And sometimes I don't know if I'll be able to do this alone. Mom cried, sobbing and sniffling at every other word. Her words made me sad and my heart ached, so I started crying. After a moment, we bid Dad goodbye, and as we turned to leave, I heard his voice. "Come eat, everyone, come eat," he said. I don't know how Mom and Uncle couldn't hear him as they were still walking away. Dad sounded very close by. I scanned all around the other rows of stones, but he was nowhere to be seen. After not seeing him anywhere, I hurried to catch up with Mom and Uncle. I hoped he liked the package we brought him. Chapter 2. A few years later, my family and I attended a gathering at my cousin's house. It was late autumn and was quite cold outside. Despite that, none of the kids had their jackets on, including me. We spent the whole day outside and didn't come in until sundown. After a day of playing, we were really hungry, so we lined up for food. They had a buffet-style setup in their living room, on 2 long tables next to each other, filled with a grand spread. There was my favorite, ginger beef soup, egg rolls, chow fun, and a ton of other goodies. My mouth watered excitedly at the glorious sight as its wonderful aroma teased my nose. I hadn't even gotten a plate yet when Mom came by. Growing up, Mom and I had a pretty rocky relationship. I'm sure she had it rough with my dad's passing, having to take care of my siblings and I all by herself. She wasn't the best with words. I wasn't sure if that was due to her frustrations, but we fought a lot. "Why were you playing outside without a jacket, stupid? Don't you know it's cold and you could get sick?" Mom yelled, smacking me in the head. "Why are you shouting and hitting me like that? None of the other parents do that to their kids," I shot back. "I just don't want you getting sick. If you do, I'm going to teach you a lesson. Hurry up and eat so we can go home." "I don't want to go home. You go by yourself." "You dare talk to me like that?" At that point, everyone took notice of our shouting match. Being so heated, I hadn't realized we had caused a scene until it was too late. My cousin's grandma came over to us. "It's okay, let him eat and stay a bit. Then y'all can go home after he calms down," she said, addressing Mom. "That bastard. He's going to get it when he gets home," Mom replied, her eyes staring daggers into me. I looked away from her gaze, then suddenly felt a sharp pinch around my ears as it began pulling on it. My ear felt like it was on the verge of being ripped off my head. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mom, her fingers clamped tightly around my ear like a pair of pliers. She must have snuck around to the other side of me when I looked away from her. I cried from the paralyzing pain, but she ignored it and continued dragging me away from the crowd. "Help! Help me!" I cried. My cousin's grandma tried a half-hearted attempt to talk her down, but Mom's mind was made up, determined to make an example of me. She pulled me from their living room through the kitchen and into the privacy of the stairwells. As soon as we were away from the crowd, she turned to face me. "Why can't you just do what I say? Instead, you embarrassed me in front of everyone. Why?" she roared. I said nothing as I continued crying with a hand on my sore ear. She glared menacingly at me, her eyes like a laser burning through me. Then she said, "When we get home, I will teach you." "No, please no," I begged and tried clinging on her. "You are an embarrassment." She shoved me hard. I tripped over one of the stairs with my back slamming into the edge of the others and winced as they dug painfully into my back. She stood over me and slapped me across the face. I was stunned and at a loss for words. I've endured some of the most gruesome beatings from her, but she'd never slapped me like that. For some reason, it felt worse than all the other beatings combined. "I hate you! I wished Dad could just come back and take me away," I yelled, putting a hand over my stinging cheek. As I ran out into the night, I turned and shouted, "You don't even love me!" Walking down the block of my cousin's neighborhood, I contemplated on the situation. Had I been such a bad son? I also didn't know what hurted more, her words, my back, or the slap I received. I felt the heat on my cheek rising as it swelled. I guess that was my answer. The cold wind did little to soothe neither my heart nor my face. Aside from some scattered streetlights and a few cars passing by, it was dark, and as Old Man Winter loomed nearby, no one dared step outside. I continued walking aimlessly for several blocks, crying and wishing for my dad to come get me. Tears and snot ran down my face as I sobbed loudly, calling for him. Shortly afterwards, I heard something unintelligible, and an eerie presence surrounded me. It made me shudder even in the cold. I stopped crying immediately, but the thought of reuniting with my dad reassured me everything would be fine. I walked around a few more blocks, then headed back to my cousin's house. As soon as I got back, we went home. As always, Mom was true to her words. The whole thing was a blur. I don't recall what I was struck with, or how many lashings I received, or if any tears were shed. I wasn't just numb to the pain, but the whole process. What I do remember was feeling hungry. I hadn't eaten all day. As soon as Mom's lesson started, I recalled telling myself, "It's okay. Soon it will all be over, and Dad will come for me." That night, I wanted to die, wishing hard to be in a better place alongside Dad as I passed out from the beating. Chapter 3. Somehow I was back in the living room of our old house from when I was 7 years old. I was on my stomach laying on the hard wooden floor. Lined up before me were little green plastic soldiers on one side and brown ones on the other. Beside me was Dad on the couch with our old Zenith TV in front of him, his attention focused on it. On the screen was a western with a cowboy in a poncho riding his horse into the sunset. I didn't know the name of the movie, but recognized its iconic tune and hummed along with it as the credits scrolled by. "Come on, put your shoes on. We're going to the store," Dad said as he got up from the couch to turn the TV off. "Okay," I said excitedly as I scampered off to find my shoes. We stepped outside after putting our shoes on. On our driveway was a car I've never seen before. It wasn't exactly new, but I wasn't going to complain. Dad went around to the driver's side and stepped in. Expecting the trip to the store on foot, I stood there on the balcony of our house, perplexed at the situation. Dad started the engine, then rolled down the window and asked, "Are you not coming?" A huge smile stretched across my face, and I ran to the rear passenger door and climbed in. There were questions I thought of but didn't ask, such as whose car it was, when did Dad learn to drive, or where were the others? In that joyous moment, nothing else seemed to matter. I was headed to the store with Dad driving, and that was good enough for me. We spent the whole day together. Dad bought me all the toys and snacks I wanted. We even stopped by the park where I played on the playground. For dinner, Dad and I went to McDonald's before going home. It was nightfall when we got back to the house. Dad and I walked in through the entryway and was surprised by a big black dog sitting in the middle of the living room, waiting for us. I did not know what breed it was, nor did I care. It rose on all fours as we entered. Though it was intimidating, I could sense no malice intentions from it. "Wow, when did we get a dog? I always wanted one," I exclaimed as I sprinted over to it. "Hey," Dad said, reaching out to me, but it was too late. I was already embracing the dog before he could say anything else. It returned my affection with its tongue to my face as I pet and held it. Chapter 4. 1,000 things raced through Mrs. Kang's mind as the woman sat there anxiously on the sofa, waiting for the ritual to finish. The whole house was filled with activity, with the gong and shamanistic chanting from the ritual, people conversing, meals being prepped, and kids horsing around. The smell of burning incense and various combinations of food hung in the air. She didn't mean for it to happen. She knew she'd let her anger get the best of her. This time it went too far. The woman was sorry and wanted to take back everything she said and done to her son. If it was possible to turn back the hands of time, she would do it in an instant. She wouldn't do it again if given another chance, which was what she told herself many times before. Mrs. Kang told herself this time she meant it. She was disgusted by herself, knowing it was her own fault her eldest son, Hmong Yu, was facing such a predicament. She prayed hard, hoping her son would return to her. The ritual itself was being performed at the shaman's house, as the family kept having to move from place to place in an attempt to prevent the spirit from following its victim. From the looks of things, it didn't seem to be working so well. Hmong Yu laid in front of her on a makeshift bed of sheets. He was asleep. If only that was the case. The boy had been that way for 3 days, ever since that night. When he did not wake the next morning, the widow called her relatives for help, and they had a shaman investigate the matter. However, the case was an unusual one, in that shaman refused to work it, referring the family to Mrs. Chu, who was the most powerful shaman in their city. That same day, the widow had her brother drive her to seek a consultation with Mrs. Chu. The shaman's words replayed in her head. She'd never forget the way Mrs. Chu looked at her. It was as if she could see the guilt in the woman's heart. The boy's spirit was filled with sorrow and much pain. Hmong Yu longed for his father and cried out to him. Because of his vulnerable state, a spirit heard his cries and heeded his calls. He will surely perish unless a special ritual is performed involving a black dog. Mrs. Kang always had a temper and a flair for being overdramatic. Her temperament wasn't totally the fault of her own, but stemmed from some unfavorable events in her life. When she was a little girl back in her home country, she fell gravely ill, causing her to lose most of her hearing in one of her ears. After that, her parents decided to keep the girl as their farmhand, so she was never educated like the rest of her siblings. Ever since then, she'd been envious of them. Despite it all, the girl continued to be a good daughter, tending to the fields and raising her siblings. Though she was far more beautiful than any of her sisters, no man wanted to wed a cripple. So all her sisters were eventually married, except her. It wasn't until her family fled their war-torn country to America that Mr. Kang took her as his bride. He was an older, widowed man. He already had children of his own, but they were grown. After 4 kids, the man died, leaving them to fend for themselves. That was when something within her broke. Mrs. Kang became even more bitter and angry from her circumstances, and she cursed the heavens for their lack of favors or fortune toward her. Without an outlet, the woman turned her frustrations on her own children. She raised her hand and beat Hmong Yu with a host of objects many times, but this has never happened before. In no way did the widow enjoy what she did, but she couldn't contain her fury, and oftentimes went beyond disciplining the boy. Every time it happened, Mrs. Kang felt a great sense of guilt and shame. So after the lessons, she held her son and embraced him in tears. Each time it was the same. She'd swear never to beat him again, only for it to happen over and over. No souls knew of her shameful deed except her younger children, who also felt her wrath on a few occasions. This time will be different, she said to herself as a man approached the living room from the back of the house where the kitchen was. He had a big black dog on a leash walking alongside of him. This was the close of the ritual. Mrs. Kang had seen countless rituals performed, but never one with a dog. Though it was rare, rituals involving dogs have been done in the past. She herself has never seen it, but heard they were only reserved for dire situations, in which the dog was sacrificed to protect the victims of evil spirits. The man guided the dog over to Hmong Yu as he laid there. He had the dog walk across the boy's body a few times. At one point, it even turned to lap at the boy's face. After he was done, the man walked the dog toward the back of the house again. Within no less than 5 minutes, Hmong Yu started to stir from his sleep. His mother sprung from her seat and onto the boy's side. "Son, Hmong Yu, wake up, it's Mom. Can you hear me? Please come back to me," Mrs. Kang cried. Chapter 5. One moment I was kneeling down, embracing the dog in the living room of our old house. The next, my whole world was engulfed in an intense, blinding white light. I flinched and tried to turn away from it, but couldn't move. My body felt like it was encased in concrete. I then came to the realization that the visions of being with my dad was all but a dream, and it saddened me. There was the silhouette of a person looking down and calling out to me, their voice familiar. "Hmong Yu, wake up, it's Mom. Can you hear me?" Her voice shook as she called to me, and her hand caressed my head slowly. I felt a few wet droplets splattered onto my face. What was that? Water? "Mom," I barely managed to get the words out. "I'm here. Can you hear me?" Mom asked, her voice cracked. Too exhausted and weak to talk or move, I nodded my head in response to her question, but wasn't sure she noticed. I was parched and licked my lips, but it did little to help. My dry, scaly lips rubbed against the slither of sandpaper that was my tongue. Though my eyes were barely opened, they eventually adjusted, and I scantily made out the features of my mom's face in the blurred vision. It was filled with worry, and her eyes were red, evident that she had been crying. "Water," I said. The words took every ounce of energy I had. "What did you say?" Mom asked. At that moment, a woman and a young boy came into view. I didn't recognize either of them. "Is he awake?" the woman asked. "Yes, but I can't hear what he's saying," Mom replied. "What did you need, son?" the woman asked, her head lowered, listening for an answer. "Water," I asked again. Go get him some water," she commanded. The boy disappeared, then reappeared after a few seconds with a cup of water and handed it to the woman. Mom and the woman sat me up, helping me take in the water. More people crowded around them. I was revitalized after a few sips, and my tongue felt somewhat normal again. I blushed at the amount of people staring at me. I didn't know why there were so many people, or where I was. I wanted to ask, but was too shy to get the words out. That, and I was still quite groggy. "We're glad you came back to us, and don't be sad," each of them kept saying over the other. I've never been so confused in my life. I had no recollection about what happened. All of it was explained to me after a meal. I found out the woman I saw with Mom was Mrs. Chu, who was a well-known shaman. After her explanation, she tied a red string around my wrist for protection. The shaman said I should never call out for a deceased loved one in that way ever again, because other spirits could hear and come to me instead, which was what happened. Despite the incident, Mom hadn't really changed much. After that, my siblings and I went a month without being beaten. However, Mom eventually reverted back to her old ways, only it was less frequent. It did not stop completely until I was about 15 years old. I was bigger and taller than her by then. However, we still continued to fight regularly because of our differences.